At 7:52 on a Thursday morning, a security guard named Kwame Asante pulled an old man by the elbow through the revolving door of the Meridian Tower on Bourdion Road in Lagos and told him he had 60 seconds to collect himself from the front steps before the guard called the police. The old man did not fight. He did not raise his voice. He picked up the broom that had fallen when Kwame grabbed him, tucked it under his arm the way a professor carries a briefcase, and walked to the edge of the steps where the morning sun cut across the marble. He sat down there on the third step, placed the broom across his knees, and looked at the street below as though he had all the time in the world. What Kwame did not know, what none of the 43 people who had walked past the old man that morning knew, was that the old man's name was on the deed to the building, not as a tenant, not as a shareholder, as the sole owner. He had owned it for 11 years. His name was Tobena Achebe. He was 68 years old and he weighed 59 kilograms, which was 11 kilograms less than he had weighed when his wife Constance died 4 years and 2 months ago. He had not noticed the weight leaving. He had only noticed that her chair at the kitchen table looked bigger every morning. He wore brown trousers that he had pressed himself with an iron that leaked steam from the left side, a white short-sleeved shirt with a button missing at the third hole. He had replaced it with a safety pin from Constance's sewing tin, and a pair of canvas shoes from a stall on Onitsha Main Market that cost 1,400 naira, and had a small split along the right sole that he covered each morning with a strip of black electrical tape. In his shirt pocket he kept a photograph, not in a wallet, just folded once. It was a photograph of Constance taken in 1991 at Makola Market in Accra. She was laughing at something off camera. He did not know what had made her laugh. He had never asked. He thought about that sometimes. For 22 months, Tobena had been coming to Meridian Tower 6 mornings a week. He arrived at 6:15 a.m. and he left at 11:30 a.m. He swept the lobby, polished the brass handles on the main entrance, wiped the fingerprints from the ground floor elevator panel, and straightened the chairs in the waiting area outside the building management office on the second floor. He did this the way Constance had taught him to cook, not because he had to, but because doing things well was its own kind of dignity. He brought his own supplies, his own mop, a blue bucket from a hardware shop on Lagos Main Island, 3 different sizes of brush. He had purchased all of it himself from a shop on the corner of Ikorodu Road for 7,600 naira total. Nobody at Meridian Tower had asked him to bring his own equipment. Nobody had asked him to come at all. This required explanation. 12 years ago, Tobena Achebe had been the managing director of Achebe Property Holdings, a company he had built from a single 2-bedroom rental unit in Enugu in 1989. By 2008, the company held 14 commercial properties across Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. Meridian Tower had been the largest acquisition, purchased in 2013 for 2.1 billion naira, from a construction group that had run into regulatory difficulties. He had signed the purchase papers on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and he and Constance had driven past the building that evening with the windows down even though the traffic on Bourdion was terrible, and it took them 40 minutes to move half a kilometer. She had reached over and held his hand on the gear shift without saying anything. He drove like that for most of the 40 minutes, her hand on top of his. When Constance died, Tobena stopped. Not all at once. It happened the way certain structural failures happen, invisible for months, then sudden. He stopped attending board meetings. He stopped answering his lawyer's calls. He stopped reviewing quarterly reports. His son Emmanuel, who was 33 and lived in London and had very strong opinions about efficiency, took over the management of the company by a power of attorney Tobena had signed during a brief hospitalization in January 2022, and without reading it as carefully as he should have. By November of that same year, Emmanuel had brought in a new management team, restructured the board, and installed a building director at Meridian Tower named Adaze Bright, who was 31 years old, who wore her authority the way some people wear new shoes, very carefully, with stiff ankles, always watching to see if anyone noticed. He had never met her. He had seen her photograph on the company website once, briefly, before he stopped opening the company website. He began coming to the building 6 months after Emmanuel took over. He could not have explained it clearly. He told himself it was to keep moving. Constance had always said that grief was a liquid, If you didn't keep moving, it pulled in you and turned. He came because the building smelled of the same industrial cleaner he had specified himself when they were fitting out the lobby in 2013. He came because the marble floor was a specific shade of gray he had chosen from a sample board in an architect's office on a Tuesday in October 11 years ago, with Constance beside him saying, quietly, that this one, not that one. He came because it was a place he had made, and being in a place he had made him feel, for a few hours, less unmade. He had not told anyone he owned it. He had not planned it as a deception. It had simply not come up. The first morning he arrived with the broom, a young security guard named Felix had assumed he was a contract cleaner and waved him through. Tabena had not corrected this. The next morning he came back, and the morning after that, the building staff learned his face without learning his name. They called him Baba, and brought him a cup of Lipton tea in a small plastic cup at 8:30 every morning, which he drank standing up near the stairs. One of the cleaners, a woman named Pauline who wore her keys on a ring attached to her belt loop, had told him once that he was the only person in the building who swept the corners properly. He had nodded and said that his wife had taught him to sweep corners before anything else because dust gathers in corners and pretends to be shadow. A day's bright arrived on the Thursday morning of the incident at 7:47 a.m. She had a meeting with a prospective anchor tenant at 900 and was already in the particular state of agitation she entered when something important was scheduled, and her control of the circumstances felt partial. She saw Tabena sweeping near the main entrance and stopped. He was sweeping slowly, with his back to the lobby, working the bristles along the joint where the marble floor met the exterior step. She watched for a moment. Then she called Kwame over and asked, in a voice that was not quiet, who the old man was, and what he was doing, and why he was using what appeared to be a privately owned broom on the front steps of a corporate property. Kwame had not been able to answer the first question satisfactorily. He said the old man had been coming for many months. Adazi said that was not an answer to the question she had asked. She said the building had a contracted cleaning company, and any other cleaning personnel on the premises were a liability concern and a brand inconsistency. And would he please ask the man to stop and leave before the 9 a.m. appointment arrived? Because she could not have a prospective anchor tenant walking past an unsanctioned elderly man sweeping the front steps with a personal broom. Kwame nodded and went. This was how Tabena found himself on the third step in the morning sun with his broom across his knees. He was watching a market woman set up her groundnut display on the pavement below, arranging her pyramids with the precision of someone who understood that geometry was a form of advertising. He had been watching her for about 6 minutes when he heard a voice above him say, in a tone that was professionally measured but not kind, that if he was looking for contract cleaning work, he should go to the agency office on Apapa Road. Tabena turned and looked at the woman. She was standing 2 steps above him, holding a folder against her chest, wearing a gray suit jacket and trousers that matched exactly, which meant she had paid attention when she bought them. He said, without moving from his position on the step, that he was not looking for contract work. He said it the way a man says something he has said once before to someone else and does not particularly wish to say again. Adazi asked him then what he was doing. He said he had been sweeping the building. She said he did not have authorization to sweep the building. He said that was true. He said he did not require authorization to sweep it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said she was going to need him to leave before 9 a.m., or she would contact the police. He said that was also her right. He did not move. At 8:14 a.m., Adazi sent a message from her office to her assistant, asking him to call the Lagos State Emergency Line. Her assistant, a young man named Bode, who had been working at Meridian Tower for 4 months and had a careful way of reading situations before acting, read the message twice and then set his phone down on the desk and did not call anyone. Instead, he pulled up the property records database that the management company used for lease verification and typed in the building address. He had done this before for routine tenant checks. He had not done it specifically for the building itself. He sat for a moment looking at what the database returned. Then he looked at the window. Then he looked at the database again. At 8:22 a.m. Bode walked down to the second floor and knocked on the office of the building's legal liaison, a woman named Mrs. Nkechi Okafor, who had worked in property law for 27 years and who kept a small printed sign on her desk, that read, in very small type, that one should verify before acting. He showed her the screen. She looked at it. She asked Bode to pull the original title document from the physical records room, which was on the third floor, in a filing cabinet marked C-13. He went. He came back 9 minutes later with a folder containing 31 pages. Mrs. Okafor opened the folder to the first page, and then to the signature page, and then held both up at the same time and looked at them together. She said quietly that she needed to speak with Ms. Bright immediately. If this story is already sitting somewhere you didn't expect, stay with it. What happens in the next few minutes is something no one in that building saw coming. Adaze was in her office reviewing the floor plan she planned to show the prospective tenant when Mrs. Okafor knocked and entered without waiting. This was unusual. Mrs. Okafor was a person who waited. Adaze looked up. Mrs. Okafor placed the folder on the desk, opened to the signature page, and placed her finger on the line at the bottom. She said, very carefully, that the man currently sitting on the front steps of the building was Tobena Achebe. She said that Tobena Achebe was the registered owner of the property at this address. She said that Emmanuel Achebe, who held power of attorney over his father's business interests, had never transferred the title of Meridian Tower into the company's holding structure. It remained in Tobena Achebe's name personally. She said this meant that the building did not belong to Achebe Property Holdings. It belonged to Tobena Achebe as a private individual. She said she did not know how this had been missed for 11 years, and that was a conversation for another time. But the immediate matter was that the man Adaze had asked Kwame to remove from the building was the man who owned the building, and that if Ms. Bright had called the police, as she had threatened, the situation would have been very difficult to explain. Adaze sat with this for a moment. Then she picked up the folder. She read the signature page. She read the next page. She set the folder down. She pressed both palms flat on the desk. She said, without looking up, to send someone to get him. Kwame was sent. He walked to the front steps and found Tobena exactly where he had left him, on the third step, broom across his knees. Kwame stood at the top of the steps and said, with his hands pressed together, that Miss Bright would like to speak with him inside. Tobena looked at the market woman below, who had finished her pyramids and was now fanning herself with a piece of cardboard. He said he would be there in a moment. He watched the market woman for another minute. Then he stood up, tucked the broom under his arm, and walked inside. The lobby was different when you walked through it knowing that a man had just been told he owned the thing he was standing in. The ground floor staff who had watched Kwame escort the old man out 40 minutes earlier now stood straighter without quite knowing why. Pauline, near the cleaning supply closet, saw Tobena walk in with Kwame behind him instead of in front, and she folded her arms and watched without expression but with the particular attention of someone who has been watching long enough to understand the shape of a situation before its details are revealed. She had worked in 3 buildings in Lagos over 17 years. She knew that the most important people in a building were often the ones nobody had correctly identified yet. Adaze met him in the lobby, not in her office. This was a choice. The office would have meant she was still in her territory. The lobby meant she had come to his. She had the folder under her arm. She was composed because composure was a thing she had trained into herself over years. But her composure had a slightly different quality than it had 40 minutes ago. The way certain materials look the same until you apply pressure, and then you can see that something has changed at a level below the surface. She said his name, not Baba. His full name, Tobena Achebe. He looked at her. She said she understood now who he was, and she wanted to apologize for what had happened this morning. She said it directly. She did not qualify it. She did not explain the liability concerns, or the brand consistency, or the prospective tenant. He listened to her say it. He nodded once. He said he would like to sit down somewhere and have a cup of tea. She said, of course, and walked with him to the waiting area near the second-floor stairs. The chairs he straightened every morning, and she sat across from him while Bode went to get tea. He did not ask her how she had not known. She did not offer an explanation. The tea came in a proper cup, not the small plastic cup from the kitchen. He noticed this and did not say anything about it. He drank the tea the way he always drank hot things, holding the cup with both hands and taking small sips. She sat with her hands in her lap. He told her after a while that his wife had chosen the marble. that she had stood in an architect's office in October 2013 with sample boards on a table and had pointed at the gray one and said, "This one, not that one." He said that he had been coming to the building for 22 months and that nobody had asked him his name, which had suited him. He said that Pauline had told him he was the only person in the building who swept corners properly, and this had been the best professional feedback he had received in 4 years. And he had meant to tell Pauline's supervisor that she was an excellent judge of maintenance. Adazi listened to all of this. She said she would make a note of it. Then he set the cup down and told her that he was not interested in using what had happened that morning in any legal or formal capacity. He said this clearly so she did not have to wonder. He said that a man who had not been present in his own life for 3 years had very little standing to hold other people accountable for not knowing who he was. He said that he would like to continue coming to the building if that was acceptable. She said yes. He said good. He asked about the 9 a.m. appointment. She glanced at her watch. It was 8:46. He asked what they were leasing and at what rate and what the anchor tenant sector was. She told him. He asked 2 questions about the floor plan. She answered them. He made one suggestion, a renegotiation of the common area maintenance clause that she had not considered. That was worth, she calculated quickly, approximately 840,000 naira annually to the building. She looked at him. He said Constance had always been the sharper negotiator, but that some of it had passed to him over 34 years. He picked up his broom, stood, and said he would see her tomorrow morning at 6:15. The 9 a.m. meeting went well. The anchor tenant signed a letter of intent that afternoon. The common area maintenance clause was renegotiated. It was worth 840,000 naira annually, exactly as Tobena had said. Emmanuel Achebe received a call from Mrs. Nkechi Okafor at 2:30 that afternoon, Lagos time. He was in London. He said nothing for 11 seconds after she explained the situation. Then he said he was coming on the Friday morning flight. She said she would arrange a car from the airport. He said he would arrange his own car. He arrived on Saturday at 11:15 a.m. with the particular look of a man who has been rearranging his understanding of something for 26 hours on a plane and has not finished. Tobena was in the lobby when Emmanuel arrived. He was near the elevator panel, wiping fingerprints from the brass with a cloth. He did not hear Emmanuel come in. Emmanuel stood in the lobby and watched his father wipe the elevator panel for a moment. He had his overnight bag over his shoulder. He looked at the marble floor, which was the particular shade of gray he had last seen in his parents' kitchen in photographs, and had not understood then was the same floor. He set the bag down on the marble. He said from across the lobby that he had been wrong. Tobena turned and looked at his son. Emmanuel said it again, because the first time he had said it very quietly, and was not certain his father had heard it properly. He said he had been managing something that was not his to manage, and had not seen it that way at the time. He said he did not know how to fix it, but that he would like to try. His voice did not change while he said this. He was his father's son in that way. Tobena looked at his son for a moment. He said, "Come in." 2 words. Emmanuel picked up his bag and walked across the lobby. Pauline, at the supply closet, looked at her keys on the ring attached to her belt loop and said nothing. Bode, at his desk on the 2nd floor, did not look up from his screen, but he was not reading anything on the screen. The market woman outside had packed her groundnut pyramids and gone home. The morning's first real heat was moving in from the water. They took the elevator to the building's rooftop terrace on the 14th floor, which Tobena had not been to since he signed the purchase papers 11 years ago. The terrace looked out over the Lagos waterfront. The water was the particular color it becomes at noon. Not blue, not gray, a color that does not have a name in any language Tobena knew, but that he recognized immediately because it was the color of the water in the photograph of Constance at Makola Market in 1991. The water in the background that you didn't notice until you looked at the photograph for a long time. He had looked at it for a long time. He and Emmanuel stood at the railing and did not speak for a while. The city moved below them. A bus groaned south on Bourdillon Road. Somewhere on the street a horn sounded twice and then stopped. Tobena took the photograph from his shirt pocket. He held it for a moment looking at it. He said Constance had laughed in it because a pigeon had landed on his head, and he had not noticed. He said he had never told anyone that. Emmanuel looked at the photograph. He said he had always thought she was laughing at something beautiful. Tobena said she was, just not a beautiful thing anyone had done on purpose. There is a particular kind of person the world makes very easy to overlook. They do not perform their worth. They do not announce it or defend it or place it in front of you and wait for recognition. They carry it the way Tobena Achebe carried his wife's photograph. Folded once, close to the chest, out of sight. You can make the mistake of seeing only the broom. You can make the mistake of thinking that what a person holds in their hands is less important than what they wear on their back. You can decide, from a hallway, from behind a folder, from the view of a lobby camera, that you already know what this person is and what they are worth and what they are here for. People do this every day. Buildings full of people are doing it right now. But there is a thing that cannot be taken by a power of attorney, or dissolved by a board restructuring or walked out through a revolving door on a Thursday morning. It is the knowledge a person carries about what they have built and why they built it. Tobena Achebe did not need a day's bright to know his name. He knew the marble. He knew the shade of gray his wife had chosen from a sample board, while the traffic on Bourdillon was terrible and the architect was waiting. He knew the building the way you know something you made with your whole life, not as information but as the temperature of a thing in your hands when you hold it. The world gives its recognition late, often too late. And sometimes it does not give it at all. What it cannot do, what it has never been able to do, is reach inside the person it overlooked and remove what is already there. Some things are not transactions. Some things were never for sale. When Emmanuel flew back to London the following Tuesday, he and his father had spent 4 days together in the building. They reviewed the management structure. They reviewed the title documentation for all 14 properties. They ate jollof rice from a black plastic bag that Tobena bought from a woman outside on the street, 2 days running, because the second day Emmanuel said he had not had jollof like that since he was 12, and Tobena bought the same bag from the same woman the next morning and brought it to the office on the 11th floor. They had set up as a temporary working space. Mrs. Okafor joined them on the 3rd day. Bode brought tea each time. Nobody told him to. He had learned in 4 months at Meridian Tower to read a situation. Emmanuel signed the management structure back to a joint oversight on Tuesday morning. His flight was at 2 p.m. He met his father in the lobby at 11:30. Tobena was near the main entrance with the broom. Emmanuel shook his father's hand and then held it for a moment longer than a handshake. Tobena nodded. Emmanuel left. Tobena went back to the steps. He swept the corners first, the way Constance had taught him. The brass handles on the main entrance caught the late morning light the way brass does when it has been polished properly, not a glare, a warmth. He tucked the broom under his arm and looked at the building from the 3rd step, the step he had sat on 11 days ago with the morning sun cutting across the marble. The groundnut pyramid woman was back in her spot on the pavement below. She had a better arrangement today. 4 pyramids instead of 3, with the largest one in the center. He noticed that she had also changed the angle of her cardboard shade, which was smarter. She was learning the light. He thought about going down and telling her that. He decided he would tomorrow. He had tomorrow, and the morning after, and the morning after that. The building had his name on the deed, and the marble his wife had chosen, and the corners he would sweep until he decided he was done sweeping them, which would be when he decided, not when someone else did. He put the photograph back in his shirt pocket and pressed it once with his palm, the way you press something to make sure it is still there. And then he picked up the blue bucket and the broom and went back inside. That was how it ended. Not with a speech, not with a ceremony. With a man walking back into his own building the way he had always walked into it, quietly, with a broom under his arm. Because the work was not finished, and he had always been the kind of person who finished what he started. There is a question I want to leave with you before you go. If you had built something, with your hands, with your grief, with 30 years of mornings, and the world looked at you and saw only the broom, and not one person in the building knew your name, would you correct them? Or would you keep sweeping the corners properly, knowing that what you built cannot be swept away by someone who doesn't know it belongs to you? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.